The past doesn't live behind you. That's the first lie the mind tells. It lives inside you, replaying itself with perfect clarity, perfect emotion, perfect control. Not because it's still happening, but because part of you needs it to keep happening. The past is not memory, it's chemistry. A hit of familiarity. A dose of identity. A slow, invisible drug that convinces the mind that reliving pain is safer than facing the unknown. That's why some people don't heal. They revisit. They don't move forward. They rewind. And the most dangerous part? The mind mistakes this addiction for reflection, for growth, for depth. But what it's really doing is staying loyal to a version of you that no longer exists. Tonight, we're not talking about motivation. We're not talking about letting go. And we're definitely not talking about positivity. We're talking about why the mind clings to the past the same way an addict clings to a substance, and why breaking free feels like psychological death. Because when you stop reliving the past, you also lose the excuse to remain the same. That's the real withdrawal. If you're drawn to this kind of psychological depth, not surface advice, not noise, but slow, honest insight into the mind's darkest patterns, stay with this channel. These videos aren't made for everyone. They're made for those who feel too much and think too deeply. The past does not knock politely. It seeps. It enters quietly, like a drug slipped into the bloodstream before you realize what has happened. Most people believe the past is something behind them, something finished, something remembered. But psychologically, the past is not behind you at all. It is inside you, alive, rehearsing, whispering, pulling strings from the dark. Chapter 1 begins with a difficult truth. Memory is not passive. Memory is active, chemical, and addictive. Every remembered moment releases emotion. Emotion releases meaning. Meaning releases identity. This is why the past is so dangerous. It does not simply tell you what happened. It tells you who you are. And once identity becomes fused with memory, the mind stops moving forward. It circles. It returns. It consumes itself. This is how addiction forms. Not through pleasure alone, but through familiarity. The brain prefers what it knows, even when what it knows is painful. Neuroscience confirms what depth psychology intuited long ago. When we replay memories, the same neural pathways fire as if the event is happening again. The body does not distinguish between now and then. The heart rate changes. Muscles tighten. Stress hormones flood the system. You are not remembering the past. You are reliving it, and every repetition strengthens the loop. This is the dosage. This is the drug. Carl Jung warned that unresolved experience does not disappear. It sinks into the unconscious, where it gains power. Whatever is not made conscious will be lived out as fate. This is not poetry. It is mechanics. A mind addicted to the past will unconsciously recreate its emotional conditions, not because it wants suffering, but because it seeks coherence. The psyche would rather repeat pain than face the terror of the unknown. The past becomes especially seductive when the present feels unstable. In moments of uncertainty, the mind retreats to what it can predict. Old wounds become reference points. Old identities become shelters. Even trauma can feel safer than freedom. At least trauma has rules. At least it is familiar. This is why people cling to stories of what was done to them, who they used to be, what they lost. The past offers certainty. The future demands courage. There are 3 primary ways the past becomes addictive. The first is nostalgia. Nostalgia is not memory. It is anesthetic. It smooths edges, edits reality, and replaces complexity with warmth. Nostalgia tells you there was a time when things made sense, when you were whole, when life was meaningful. But this is a distortion. The past was never as clean as you remember it. Nostalgia is the drug that keeps you chasing an emotional state that never truly existed. The second addiction is regret. Regret is nostalgia's darker twin. It loops around missed chances, wrong decisions, alternate lives that never happened. Regret convinces you that the present is inferior because it does not match a fantasy version of the past. It drains energy from action and redirects it into rumination. Regret feels responsible, even moral, but it is paralysis disguised as reflection. The third addiction is grievance. Grievance is identity built on injury. When pain becomes central to how you define yourself, letting go feels like betrayal. Who are you without the wound? Who are you without the injustice? The mind resists healing because healing threatens the narrative. This is why some people unconsciously protect their suffering. It gives them shape. Jung understood that the psyche seeks wholeness, not happiness. And wholeness requires integration. The problem is that integration demands that the past be metabolized, not consumed raw. When memories are not digested, they ferment. They intoxicate the mind. You begin to see the world through yesterday's eyes. New experiences are filtered, distorted, rejected. The future is judged before it arrives. The brutal truth is this: the past cannot be undone, but it can be outgrown. However, outgrowing something feels like death to the ego. The ego survives by continuity. It needs the story to remain intact. Breaking addiction to the past means allowing the old self to dissolve. This is why people resist it. This is why they relapse into memory. This is why they scroll through old conversations, revisit old places, replay old arguments in their heads late at night. The mind says it is searching for closure. In reality, it is searching for control. If you can fully understand the past, maybe you can neutralize its power. But understanding without transformation only deepens the groove. Insight alone does not cure addiction. Action does. Presence does. Responsibility does. The past becomes less powerful the moment it stops being your primary source of meaning. When identity shifts from what happened to what is happening, the drug loses potency. But this shift is not comfortable. It requires sitting with uncertainty. It requires enduring the withdrawal of familiarity. It requires tolerating a sense of emptiness while something new forms. This chapter is not about erasing memory. It is about reclaiming authority. The past should inform you, not command you. When memory becomes the master, the soul stagnates. When memory becomes material, the soul evolves. The war against the soul begins when the past is mistaken for truth rather than experience. And this is only the beginning, because once the past loosens its grip, something else emerges. Fear, freedom, responsibility. The next chapter explores why most minds would rather remain addicted than face what comes after the past releases its hold. Addiction to the past is rarely questioned because it is socially rewarded. Stories of suffering earn sympathy. Stories of nostalgia earn connection. Stories of grievance earn allegiance. But none of these earn growth. Growth is quiet. Growth is lonely. Growth demands that you stop worshiping what was and begin risking what could be. And that risk, more than pain, is what most people are truly addicted to avoiding. This is where the real battle starts. Not in memory, but in the present moment, where excuses no longer protect you or save you. The most dangerous addiction is the one that disguises itself as intelligence. Chapter 2 is about why the mind defends its addiction to the past, not emotionally, but logically. This is where people don't just relive the past. They justify it. They build philosophies around it. They turn memory into a moral position. And once that happens, escape becomes threatening, not liberating. A mind that is addicted to the past does not see itself as stuck. It sees itself as deep. It believes that revisiting old experiences is a sign of awareness, maturity, even wisdom. I'm just processing, it says. I'm trying to understand. But underneath that language is avoidance. Understanding becomes a substitute for action. Analysis replaces movement. Reflection replaces risk. Carl Jung warned about this exact trap. He observed that the intellect often serves the unconscious, not truth. When a person is not ready to change, the mind will generate endless reasons to stay the same. This is why some of the most psychologically articulate people remain the most imprisoned. They can explain their wounds perfectly, yet live entirely inside them. The past becomes a fortress built from explanations. Every memory is reinforced with meaning. Every pain is contextualized. Every failure is rationalized. The mind convinces itself that staying attached is responsible, cautious, even noble. But in reality, it is afraid. Afraid of uncertainty. Afraid of loss of identity. Afraid of becoming someone unrecognizable. There is comfort in knowing who you are, even if who you are is broken. There is terror in not knowing who you might become. This is where the addiction deepens. The past offers coherence. It explains why you are the way you are. It gives you a map. The future offers no such clarity. It demands experimentation. It demands vulnerability. It demands that you act without guarantees. And the addicted mind hates guarantees more than pain. This is why people return to old relationships that hurt them. Why they replay arguments they already lost. Why they cling to labels formed in childhood. These patterns are not irrational. They are predictable. The mind chooses familiar suffering over unfamiliar growth every time. Not because it enjoys pain, but because it fears chaos. Jung described this as the domination of the complex. A complex is not just a memory. It is an emotionally charged cluster of experiences that hijacks perception. When a complex is activated, the present disappears. You are no longer responding to what is happening now. You are reacting to what happened then. The complex does not want resolution. It wants repetition. Repetition strengthens its existence. The tragedy is that the mind often confuses repetition with mastery. It believes that if it goes over the past enough times, it will finally gain control. But control never comes. Only fatigue, only stagnation, only a shrinking sense of possibility. Another reason the mind clings to the past is because the past contains witnesses. There were people there. They saw you. They validated you. They hurt you. They defined you. The present often feels empty by comparison. Quiet, unobserved. And for many people, being unseen feels worse than being wounded. So the mind returns to where it was noticed, even if that attention came through pain. This is especially true for those whose identity formed around struggle. Without struggle, they feel invisible. Without pain, they feel irrelevant. The past becomes proof that they existed. The addiction is reinforced socially. Culture rewards stories of trauma, nostalgia, and grievance. It rarely rewards silent transformation. There is applause for survival, but very little for reinvention. Reinvention threatens narratives. It unsettles people who are still attached to their own pasts. This is why change often leads to isolation. When you stop repeating old stories, people don't always follow. Some resist, some disappear. Some accuse you of forgetting where you came from. This social pressure pushes many people back into memory. The past feels safer than loneliness. But Jung made one thing clear. Individuation, the process of becoming whole, is not a group activity. It is solitary. It requires separating from collective expectations, including shared memories. It requires choosing truth over belonging. The addicted mind fears this separation. It interprets it as abandonment, betrayal, arrogance. But in reality, it is maturation. You cannot build a future while kneeling before the past. At some point, memory must step aside. The withdrawal from the past is subtle. There are no dramatic symptoms. There is just a quiet discomfort, a feeling of groundlessness, a sense that the old explanations no longer work. This is the most dangerous moment. Many people relapse here. They run back to familiar pain because the emptiness feels unbearable. But that emptiness is not failure. It is space. Space is where something new can form, but only if you tolerate it. Only if you resist the urge to fill it with old stories. Only if you allow identity to loosen without rushing to replace it. The past loses power, not when it is defeated, but when it is no longer needed. When the present becomes rich enough, meaningful enough, demanding enough, memory fades into proportion. Not erased, integrated. This chapter ends with a hard truth. Most people are not trapped by the past. They are loyal to it. They defend it. They protect it. Because without it, they would have to step forward without armor. And that step feels like falling. Chapter 3 will explore what actually happens when the past begins to release its grip. Why freedom feels frightening. Why growth feels disorienting. And why many people mistake that fear for danger instead of initiation. Freedom does not arrive like relief. It arrives like disorientation. Chapter 3 is about the moment when the past begins to loosen its grip, and why so many people mistake that moment for danger instead of growth. This is the phase where the addiction starts to break, and the mind panics, because for the first time, it cannot rely on old pain to tell it who it is. When the past weakens, something strange happens. The emotional charge fades. Old memories no longer sting the same way. Triggers lose intensity. And instead of feeling victorious, the person feels empty, anxious, even lost. This is not regression. This is withdrawal. The past provided structure. It organized the personality. It gave the ego a center of gravity. When that gravity weakens, the psyche enters a free-floating state. Jung described this as a necessary chaos, the dissolution phase before reorganization. But most people are not taught to tolerate psychological chaos. They are taught to fear it. So when meaning collapses, the mind assumes something is wrong. This is why people often sabotage progress right before transformation. They quit therapy. They revive old conflicts. They re-enter familiar suffering. Not because the pain returned, but because certainty disappeared. Pain at least felt defined. Freedom feels undefined. The ego craves definition. It would rather be a known failure than an unknown possibility. So when the past no longer dominates, the ego scrambles to recreate it. It scans memory for something to resurrect. A grievance, a regret, a role, anything solid. This is the critical threshold. If crossed, identity evolves. If avoided, the addiction resumes. Jung believed that growth requires the courage to endure meaninglessness temporarily. He warned that many people stop just short of individuation because they cannot tolerate the void. The void is not emptiness. It is unformed potential. But to the unprepared mind, it feels like annihilation. Without the past, the question arises, who am I now? This question terrifies people because it has no immediate answer. The past always answered it quickly. I am the one who was hurt. I am the one who survived. I am the one who failed. These identities came with scripts, expectations, limits. Without them, responsibility returns. Freedom demands authorship. The emerging self must now choose values instead of inheriting them, direction instead of reaction, action instead of explanation. And this shift exposes a deeper fear, the fear of accountability. As long as the past ruled, responsibility could be deferred. Blame had a home. Causes were external. But when the past loosens, excuses evaporate. This is why freedom feels heavier than bondage. Bondage gives reasons. Freedom gives decisions. At this stage, many people experience a strange nostalgia for their old pain. They miss the intensity, the drama, the emotional highs and lows. Stability can feel dull by comparison. Jung noted that some people unconsciously prefer neurosis to health because neurosis makes them feel alive. Health is quieter. Strength is quieter. Growth does not shout. This is where quiet power is born, not in conquest, but in restraint. Not in dominance, but in self-command. The individual who resists the pull of old narratives develops a new center, one rooted in presence instead of memory. Presence is uncomfortable at first. It removes distraction. It removes identity noise. It confronts you with your actual life, not your remembered one. And that confrontation reveals something painful. Time lost. Many people relapse here because they cannot forgive themselves for how long they were addicted to the past. Regret tries to reclaim control. You wasted years, it says. It's too late. This is one of the past's final weapons. But regret is still attachment, still loyalty. Jung emphasized that transformation is not about erasing what was, but refusing to be defined by it. The past does not disappear. It takes its proper place, behind you, not inside you. When this happens, the psyche reorganizes. Energy once trapped in memory becomes available for creation. Focus sharpens. Emotions stabilize. There is less urgency to explain yourself, less desire to be understood, more willingness to act without validation. This is the sign that the addiction is breaking. But this stage requires discipline. Without the drama of the past, the ego searches for stimulation. Many people replace one addiction with another: productivity, ideology, control. True strength resists this substitution. It allows calm to be enough. Jung warned that power without consciousness becomes tyranny. The individual who breaks free from the past must not turn strength into a new identity trap. Strength is not who you are. It is how you move. The final test of this chapter is solitude. Not loneliness, but self-containment. The ability to stand without narrating yourself, without proving, without revisiting. When someone reaches this stage, others may not recognize them. They are quieter, slower to react, harder to manipulate. The world mistakes this for detachment. In reality, it is integration. The past no longer dictates behavior. The future no longer intimidates. Action flows from the present. This is not happiness. It is alignment. Chapter 3 ends here, at the edge of true independence. The past has loosened. The void has been endured. Identity has softened. What comes next is not freedom as escape, but freedom as responsibility. The final stage, where strength is no longer built against pain, but beyond it. The final chapter will confront the hardest truth of all: why many people secretly do not want to be free, and what it actually costs to choose a life that is no longer driven by memory, fear, or addiction to who you used to be. Freedom is not the reward at the end of healing. It is the cost. This is the truth most minds avoid, because the past, no matter how painful, offers something freedom never does: permission to remain unfinished. The past gives context. Freedom removes it. And when context disappears, responsibility stands naked. This final chapter is about that cost. When the past finally releases its grip, there is no celebration. There is silence. No enemy left to fight. No wound left to explain. No story left to hide behind. The mind waits for relief and instead meets exposure. This is the moment many unconsciously retreat. Not because they are weak, but because freedom demands something most identities are built to avoid: choice. Without the past directing behavior, every action becomes voluntary. Every failure becomes personal. Every delay becomes a decision. This is why so many people unconsciously preserve suffering. Pain creates justification. Trauma creates narrative shelter. Freedom removes both. Jung understood that neurosis often survives not because it is unbearable, but because it is useful. It excuses stagnation. It delays accountability. It allows life to remain theoretical. The individual can endlessly analyze instead of act, reflect instead of risk, remember instead of build. Freedom ends this pattern. The mind resists not because it fears pain, but because it fears exposure to its own unused capacity. The question beneath all resistance is simple and terrifying. What if I am capable and wasted time anyway? So the psyche clings to the past like an alibi. But true individuation begins only when that alibi dissolves. At this stage, the individual realizes something unsettling. The past did not only hurt them, it protected them. It limited expectations. It justified avoidance. It gave them a fixed identity that required no expansion. Releasing it feels like betrayal of the self that survived. This is why freedom often feels disloyal. The old self whispers that abandoning its pain invalidates its endurance, that moving forward erases what was endured. But growth does not erase suffering. It redeems it by refusing to repeat it. Strength emerges here, not as force, but as restraint. The restraint to stop narrating yourself. The restraint to stop explaining. The restraint to stop waiting for understanding before moving forward. Jung warned that those who cannot stand alone will seek belonging in systems that think for them. Ideologies, movements, dogmas, anything that replaces the authority of memory with the authority of consensus. This is not freedom. It is substitution. True strength is quieter than rebellion. It is the ability to remain internally governed when no structure is provided. This final stage strips identity down to behavior, not who you were, not what happened, only what you choose repeatedly. This is unbearable for those addicted to reflection. Because reflection feels deep, action feels exposed. The individual who passes this threshold no longer needs to be seen as strong. They no longer seek validation for endurance. They stop advertising their depth. Silence becomes sufficient because self-respect replaces self-defense. Others may interpret this as emotional distance. In reality, it is emotional sovereignty. The past does not vanish. It becomes information instead of identity. Memory becomes a reference, not a residence. The nervous system calms because it is no longer tasked with guarding a narrative. Energy returns. Focus sharpens. Life becomes immediate instead of symbolic. But this state comes with loneliness. Not the loneliness of abandonment, but the loneliness of authorship. No one else can take responsibility for choices anymore. No one else can be blamed for stagnation. This solitude is the price of freedom, and it filters most people out. Jung believed that few people complete this journey because most prefer meaning given to them over meaning created by them. Freedom requires construction without applause, progress without witnesses, discipline without identity rewards. This is why the truly strong rarely announce themselves. They do not live loudly. They live deliberately. They do not argue with the past. They outgrow it. They do not prove healing. They demonstrate it through consistency. At the end of this path, there is no dramatic transformation, no final catharsis, no emotional climax. There is only alignment. Thought matches action. Desire matches behavior. Fear loses its authority. This is the quiet ending the ego never wanted. The past offered intensity. Freedom offers clarity. One feels powerful. The other actually is. And this is the final truth. Most people are not trapped by their past. They are protected by it. Until the day they decide protection is no longer worth the cost. That day does not feel heroic. It feels calm. And calm, for the undisciplined mind, feels terrifying. This is where the war ends. Not with victory, but with silence. If this stayed with you, don't rush away from it. Sit with the silence it created. You don't need to agree. You don't need to comment. Just notice what part of you felt seen. That's the part worth protecting. And if you return, return slowly.